Hello there. Welcome on our show. It's the IFAMA 2020 Goes Digital show. I'm very happy with my guest, Tiffany Tsui. We're going to talk about digitalization and digitization in China. What is the state of digitalization, both front end and in primary production, and what is happening in between in China? How did it develop, and what could we learn from what has happened in China, and what could China perhaps learn from us in order to create world peace? Well, that's a joke, but it's very important. Tiffany, good morning to you. It's morning here. How are you today?
I'm fine. Perfect weather.
It's nice. It's going to be a hot day, probably the first hot day in June, and it's dry over here. Tiffany, when preparing this interview, and when because we already had a panel discussion with Mary Sheldon and Aidan Connolly, you told us that as from 2003, when SARS hit China, the digital developments that had already been there really took off. So 17 years ago, you were already at a point where we are now because of the new coronavirus. We tend to shop online because we don't want to go to shops anymore. It's not that safe. So we order to have things delivered on our doorsteps. That took off. You told us that you don't pay anymore. There is no money. There aren't any debit or credit cards. You don't have your debit card hoovering as we do in the West over a machine and paying. You pay by WeChat without any money. And even beggars have a code, and you donate. You don't pay them. You donate with WeChat, which is quite astonishing. We have the excuse, well, I don't carry cash, so I can't give you anything. You don't have it. Now, is that true? Is that image about correct, or is this a caricature?
No, that is correct. That's already been happening in the last 5 years. So with the WeChat or Alipay, the two big ones, what happens is the transaction cost or the barrier for any small owners, shop owners, or for business owners to enter the e-commerce become extremely low. So that's what's really brought the whole nation onto the world, let's say.
So everyone is on a platform.
Everybody is connected, either WeChat or Alipay or rural areas. Everybody has a cell phone, then they're connected.
So everyone is on even the smallest shop is on what we would call Amazon or bol.com in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Right. So that is astounding, I think. And then you told us that there is no last mile problem. We are still trying to find out how to, what is true, delivery. So the people delivering don't make money. They try to gain customers, but they don't make money. How come the Chinese companies make money? For China, if you look at agriculture product, first of all, the saying that it's not the last mile, it's the first 10,000 miles, stupid. So that's, we'll come back to later about the whole chain issue. But indeed, for delivery, online shopping, logistics, the last few years, the e-commerce platform has grown exponentially. So because of the volume and the sheer volume of consumers in China, that makes also the logistic cost extremely low and affordable. Of course, there's also a large amount of migrant workers from rural areas that's doing this type of low-paid, hard, long hours delivery jobs in the cities. So it's a combination, volume, and we'd call it migrants, but they are rural workers who came to the cities and who are prepared to work for not that much money. And that is why there is no last mile problem. Because when you order in China, you'll have it delivered half an hour later. The expectation, people do expect rather soon. So different cities, you order something, the expectation is within a day or two, within the same city, within the same day. So for fresh, the shops like Alibaba, Hema, they promise within 3 kilometers, half an hour. So consumers in China are very, in a way, spoiled that the online delivery service need to be fast.
Are there still any Chinese in cities who go to a shop and actually shop for their daily meals?
Well, until before COVID-19, actually for fresh products, it was still a difficult business because people are much more used to shop online for clothing, electronics, but fresh actually was still a small portion, even though it's quickly growing. It was until a few months ago quite difficult for e-commerce fresh platform to be really profitable because one is the whole chain issue. So from production quality, the cold chain management, and also consumers are still more used to going to more traditional web markets where you can feel things, you can touch it, you can see whether it's fresh, because freshness, of course, important. And also the consumer habit behavior, because again, most of the young people in urban areas, they don't cook, but their parents, they do still a lot of cooking. So these people about 50 or 60 years old, they still have the habit of always going to the web markets. But since 2 months, that also basically converted this really the consumer behavior, and people are now used to shop online for fresh.
And how big was it before COVID-19 and how big is it now? Do you have any, well, just an estimate, 5% to 60%, or how did it grow?
400%.
400%?
Yes, in 2 months. So e-commerce transactions for fresh.
And it was, and the market share of e-commerce was in food, in fresh?
In fresh, about some surveys depends on the age group, but then a few years back, that puts the number around 10-15%.
And nowadays?
I haven't seen the latest statistics, but then from interviews and from news, some of the main or the companies doing e-commerce, directly selling consumers, their volume online at least doubled or 4 times.
So it could be 50, 60% now, going up from 10, 15 to
could
50
be,
to 60%.
Yes. So that number, of course, now with things starting to easing down again, we'll have to see if that behavior really stays. But many of the e-commerce for fresh now get also a big boost because there is also like SARS, it leaves a more long-term impact on the whole chain development, on investment. So more the upstream companies, so the big companies that's been investing in the last mile also knows that the limitation is in the first 10,000 miles. So see the giants like whether they're in e-commerce or they're in retail or in logistics, many companies are positioning to invest in the production side. So IT company become pig farmers. That's a recent one, actually, that legend, it's now becoming a pig farmer, or pig farming move up to the upstream. Shunfeng, the biggest logistic company, they are also working very closely with rural areas to build their sourcing center. So they basically, so for example, Shunfeng is in transport, but they invest in production. So they do the physical transportation. They also build their own online shops. In that sense, it's a trend where the chain is becoming very much vertically integrated, where you can control the complete product quality from sourcing all the way to consumers.
So hold on, because this is indeed very interesting. Because of these 400% growth, produce is needed, and distributors become farmers, or various companies in the food chain become farmers. And so you were already there. What is happening? Because they aren't farmers. And the farmers that were already in place probably didn't produce. So what is happening? Please enlighten us on what is happening from the demands. So from the demand side, a whole revolution is taking place. That is what I get from you.
Yes. Well, in the last years, what you see is the infrastructure for enabling a agricultural revolution is in place. So the payment issues, the consumer channels, shortening, bringing the whole transport. Now, this investment really has been taking place in a tremendous amount in the last 5 years, but the limitation has been on the production side. So farmers has a number of issues. One is starting from the land policy. That the land policy currently in China still means that in many regions, farming plot are very small. They are under collective right, and each it's a typical saying is one mu, one household. So one mu is like 0.6 hectares. It's a very small plot. So when you have a small plot, of course, that makes also difficult to invest in automation, in mechanization. So that's one limitation. But land policy is now, there will be another time that now is going through dramatic changes also in coming years to solve that problem. Secondly is and knowledge and know-how, because in the past 20 years, Chinese GDP growth has been driven by industrial growth. So meaning that the able-bodied young people, they would leave rural areas. They will go to Shenzhen, go to the coastal area. They work in factories, and then they work in logistics or transport or courier. They leave farming behind. So that means people who stay behind the villages are old or women or so they lack also skill. And farming traditionally, because it is not a money-making business. So in the society overall, farmers are not really considered something desirable. If you have a graduate student to study, agriculture tend to be the last result. So meaning if you cannot go to better schools, you cannot go into better discipline like finance, electronics, IT, then you end up with pigs of forestry So that's also changing, but still that's a quite fundamental issues on education, but that's again a whole change. So the sector need to becoming more high-tech, more attractive, offers good prospect. And then you can have entrepreneurs, managers, and also technicians. So not farmer who work very hard work under the sun, get not too much pay, have a lot of risk associated with the climate issues, but really need to be seen as a respectable job, good prospect, which that's not also need to change. So that's the education side. And relating to that, of course, is the whole information flow. So you have when the chain is so long, you have 30, let's say, from the guy grows his cabbage, for example, he need to bring it to a collection point where there's a dealer coming from outside to buy on a low price, and then he goes out and goes through several. Then you go to the urban market, and then it goes. So when you have all this in between middlemen, the information flow is very slow. So farmers actually have no idea what the urban consumers want. So, and there's also a problem in China. There's because of this lack of differentiation, so quality, especially on low-end markets, you have actually overproduction. So if something, for example, a certain product or brand or 1 year is very popular, price went down. So everybody next year start going the same thing. And so what happens? Next year, price collapse. So this kind of cycle, then it makes very difficult for farming to become very profitable. So that's always been a multitude of factors affecting the very low productivity on the production side.
Okay, to sum this up, it's very interesting what you're teaching us. It's the land policy actually created still subsistence farming, and that needs to change. So reforms are being underway, but farmers, obviously, because farming is subsistence farming, aren't well regarded. What is happening now, and that is a revolution. China has created its power with its industrial revolution, and now it needs afterward, because in the old world, there was first an agricultural revolution and then an industrial. Now, China is reversing things. It has its industrial revolution with a very developed consumer and infrastructure. And now the companies who have created that infrastructure are investing in agriculture in order to make it sexy and profitable, because they need a produce. They need it. That is what you're telling us. Is that correct?
Also, one is certainly there's a huge consumer market demand to be filled. I mean, for last 10 years, we always know that in principle, urban consumers in the big cities in China are not paying any less than consumers in Europe, for example. So China has a very big income divide. That's where also the debate is China still a developing country? Yes, if you look at the complete countries, China is still a developing country, because you have still a couple 100 million farmers or people that earns still not too much still in developing income line. But if you do, people, Westerners typically look at Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, these coastal big cities. And those cities has also at least 200, 300 million consumers. They're like size US, very big, but still only 1/3 of the country's population.
How do incomes compare in the rural areas and in the cities? 1 to 10, or what is it?
Well, I think then you can compare, basically you have a third world in more poor areas, and you have the first world in big cities.
So that might be 10 times indeed.
Yes, at least.
At least, even more. Okay. But the volume is huge in cities, as you said.
Yes, so that's even though even 1% of 1 billion still represent a very sizable amount of consumers, of course.
Yeah.
But
so there is an industrial revolution taking place in agriculture. That is what we're getting at in this interview. Is that correct?
Yes, that's indeed that. With the big issue is with the advanced development in industry, how do you bring all this, the way of, for example, one comparison is say, well, China has invested majorly in infrastructure in highways and high-speed rails. For anybody who have been to China last 5 years, it's shocking to see how fast high-speed rail connection connect the whole China. There's also another issue that's laid the foundation to bring the country more integrated. If you use that same kind of industrial management in quality, in organization, in and then also the way you invest in roads, in highways, and high-speed rails, but bring that to agriculture infrastructure, which will mean soil remediation, also in irrigation systems, also that the bringing industrial development of agriculture. What kind of potential would that be? So agriculture is, in principle, it's not the most difficult. So I always ask if you can launch a rocket. So why is that agriculture so backward? That's also because agriculture has very long chains. It's probably the longest chain in processes. So now the chains are front. So the upstream processes in logistics, in retail, in e-commerce, in transactions are very much in place. Indeed, the next wave for the government to invest, stimulate, is to bring the rural world connected, let's say, coupled with the modern infrastructure. So in that sense, it's the driving for the agricultural revolution. It's both, we just mentioned, there's huge consumer demand. For sure, it's already in place. Infrastructure is ready, but it's also a very big political task for many reasons. It's now time to, for the government, it's very important. The rural economy fulfills several important top agenda. One is the income gap. And secondly is to create, let's say, the demand in rural economy, because China needs to also in the coming years more and more depend on stimulating own consumption than exporting. And the third, of course, is the whole agriculture self-sufficiency, quality, and then the agriculture productivity. So in that sense, the biggest driver in this is government. The government money, government infrastructure, government investment. And because of that, then the big companies will follow where the government points.
So there is indeed a whole policy going on. There was an industrial revolution. Now you need an agricultural revolution, and the country needs to develop its home consumption. Its home consumption for industrial goods.
Yes.
And its home consumption for food from the country itself.
Yes.
And what is the role of so I have two questions now. What is the role of digitalization in that? The whole infrastructure front end is already there. What is digitalization going to do in order for farmers to make money? Because they need the information, what consumers want. We have in the West has the same problem. There's always overproduction. Farmers never make any money. You could be on the way to solving that problem. And the other question is, what is it going to mean geopolitically? Because China will perhaps import less food. And obviously, China is always looking for food in the rest of the world because it needs it, because its production isn't well up to standards. And it could go up to standards now. But now this first question, what is digitalization doing in the primary industry, in the primary production? How is it going to go up because of new techniques and digitalization?
I think on that you will see drivers from impact on different fronts. One is to also pay attention. I think the important one, laying the overall infrastructure, is the new investment in what China central government now called new infrastructure, literally new infrastructure, compared to 2008 when, with the financial crisis, Chinese central government also put in, I think, trillions of amount into infrastructure. So that's where I mentioned you see the big improvement in roads, high-speed rails. So now with the COVID-19 and then the economic difficulties, government will continue to take on that role in investing in infrastructure. So that's to create employment, also have providing infrastructure. So the focus for the new infrastructure will still be a big part in physical infrastructure. So continuously expanding the high-speed connections. The big part is in digital infrastructure. So 5G network is a very big one. Now it's, I think, as of now, that the most cell phone will be on 5G network. And with that, you can, a whole lot of applications, of course, with 5G. I think that you need to look at the whole expert on 5G. But then for Internet of Things, connecting with data, drones operations, remote monitoring, autonomous growing, and satellite data information for farmers, this all will become a reality also at the affordable cost. So on the large infrastructure, I think you will see also a lot of potential indeed for digitization and digitalization, digital data, applied to large crop production commodities from areas in terms of fertilizing, pesticides, monitoring, and irrigation. A lot will happen there. And in terms of...
and obviously, the integrity of goods, trust, that is, can be guaranteed because of these technologies.
Yes, so that's at the same time, with digital currencies, also China has now issued a central Bank of China digital currency. So that's been set as a competitor as the US standard. So China is now making sure that they also have a standard setting power in terms of digital currency. So with blockchain, and then with any big companies all developing track and trace technologies using blockchain. So to monitor from product from sourcing to consumers, that's now it's very well developed. That will also enable the trust in the complete chain. So that's a very important topic where how food is produced, handled by who, any human contact even, and then also all the way up till the whole cold chain, for example, that is important for fresh product, and all the way to the doors of consumers. Who has been in touch, has been a temperature changed, and this will become part of the norm, basically, for license to operate for agriculture product. And then, in that sense, it's digital currency, and then also with the e-platform, which you see already happening, especially with COVID-19, is that the problem where producers has no access to consumer is partially, at least it's now having another channel that can be solved. More and more you see farmers from areas go on to the direct live streaming broadcasting channels like TikTok, for example, to promote their products directly to consumers. And there has been quite some successful cases, not to say it's a completely changing it, but you see now suddenly the chain is shortened. You don't need to have the 30 middlemen in the middle, but a farmer growing a high quality peach, in principle, he can directly reach out to consumers. And
describe us what someone does. So he appears on TikTok and he says, "Hey, I've got some peaches, 300 tons. Buy them," and this has happened to them, and I can guarantee through the whole what has happened to them on the trees, what happened to them in the cold chain, and really the product is you can trust it, buy it. And is that what is happening?
Yes, live streaming is now the biggest development in e-commerce. So it's two-way, it's live, and very popular still. It's still more the consumer product. Agriculture is probably new, but it's with the COVID-19 was starting to be a trend. So what happens there is that especially a product with a niche market, with a story behind it, with something uniqueness to it. So what happens if you go on to TikTok or another platforms, you can announce by WeChat again. So that's a big commercial channel to say, I will have my live streaming 2:00 to tomorrow afternoon. So what you will see is either the owner or even you see on news a lot of times is the city government officials together, as mayors, for example, that together with the farmer, then they become the ambassador for their product. And then indeed, it's just like a traditional market, but now it's live. So you don't talk to the people, physical audience, but you talk to a camera. And then you indeed promote, I have my peach, this is where I grow, you can see it. I have a story, this is me, I'm the one growing it. I work hard. So there's always a component of authenticity, so people can trust you. They also have to like you. There's a need to also, the successful ones has a personal appeal also. There's a story, trustworthy own story, and but there's also very popular to hire what you call internet influencers. That's also not a big trend. But for agriculture product, tend to be then the owners themselves or the government mayors together. And then they sell at that moment. They say in 2 hours. They also give certain benefit like discounts only available in 2 hours. Of course, you can always order afterwards, but then they create a kind of attracting certain internet flow and attention to their product. And then they ship it with the infrastructure, with phone, whatever, in a day or two to where they need to be.
That is great. We in the Netherlands, we're grappling with farmers markets. In California, we're grappling with farmers markets. Yes. And because this front end infrastructure is there, you can do it with a farmer 4,000 miles away, and they just sell directly.
Yes,
it's the dream of a Western farmer.
Yes, I think that's also, of course, now with COVID-19, you see some small experiment on the in the Netherlands, also in elsewhere, is where you directly buy from the grower or from the quaker, from the nursery or from the flower or from but these producers, I think there's reason they still would rely mostly on the traditional supply chain. And that's also, of course, something to be said, because in Europe, in Netherlands, for example, the whole fresh supply chain is so well developed. You have a lot of very efficient middlemen, but they're very efficient. The transport, the traders, and because the front end infrastructure is not so advanced. So for any producer to go on to this time channel is new, but there's also more transaction costs. So I think you see now, once the crisis is a little bit under control, people, they kind of go back to the traditional channels again, or maybe that will change. But one thing you could learn is indeed that to be more resilient, to already explore different channels, because when there's disruption, then you don't go through a kind of shock in the first 2 months, which we see in the Dutch fresh sectors in the beginning of the COVID.
Well, I was going to sum up. COVID-19 could bring us something beautiful, a direct link between the farmer, the customer, singling out his product. So with customer willingness to pay for a product, he trusts. And indeed, we try to slip back into our habits, whereas we could learn from China and get more on this bandwagon of being online and creating trust online. I have one final question on trust. Trust is very important in China, and me being from Europe and Northern Europe, we live in a high trust society. America is already a little bit, US is already a little bit different, but we tend to trust our food. The Chinese tend not to trust their food. That's why they trust imported food. What is digitalization doing for trust in China, and how come these direct connections indeed create trust, and thus a unique way of creating willingness to pay?
Well, in China, you have really a very big price range. So I say Chinese consumers are willing to pay for trust. So it's a very big value attached to whether you can trust a product.
What is trusted and what is not trusted? Compares 1 to how much?
I think you are talking about price difference at least 5 to 10 times. Compared to, but then there's also the price can be very low. So basically you have a very polarized market, meaning that you are either in the low end, so where there's overproduction, large volume, quality not guaranteed, or and the premium markets where they tend to be either have labeling in green food or organic food, or they are sold, or let's say they're endorsed by the place they are sold, so high-end supermarket or online business channels that's more regarded, or direct channel from brand themselves, so branding, certification, or let's say the more external environment, packaging, supermarket. or advertisement. So there you have a huge premium for those kind of products where they try to get consumer to trust that what they stated as authentic, healthy, no pesticide are true. But still, even that doesn't mean consumer would be still trusting. For example, if you ask Chinese consumer, do you know what organic label entails, of the green food label entails, most people cannot answer. But it gives a additional source of trust. But do you really completely trust it? Also not completely, because people say, yeah, I pay 5 times to buy organic product. But whether it's really organic or really good, I do not know. But at least this gave me a little more reason to trust it. So with the digitization, you will see that the several fronts will also bring this more. One is China is now, the people overall around the world are now all focusing on, or at least putting more focus on healthy product, fresh product. And so Chinese government, like Europe also, is now increasing organic produce as well. So the number of products or acres used for ecological or organic growing will also increase, or green products, so less pesticide, more. But this whole process, for example, of certification, that can be already more digitized. In the current system, it's still you need to send a certifier to a farmer. So already that's not possible with COVID. So you need to be having digital means. How do you do that? That needs to a lot of standardization and tracking and monitoring, and for example, the whole blockchain, whether a thing's booked. So that will be one step you will see that will you will see the kind of development. And second,
so this hang on there. This is important because it's new. Digitization in the checks would create an opportunity for digitalization, for making it more transparent and creating meaning. What does it mean when I buy green produce? What does it mean? What happened? You can explain it. Is that happening? Because so Westerners will trust a label as well, but they don't know what it is about, as the Chinese. But once you digitize and you create digitalized applications, you can show them the movie, what happened with this product.
Yes, that's happening. So you have currently you can, like the West, you can also scan a barcode of the, you call those the what do you call this code again? The new barcode. So still 2-dimensional, but you can also have more advanced scanning, which tells you a lot more information about the origin, who grows it, process. So those kind of labeling or consumer end tracking, it's already in place. You will see them more and more. So indeed, you can, with, for example, the kind of live streaming possibilities, you can, where more room, also more demand for farmers to focus on their branding. So branding is not just putting, of course, a label, but also building up the reputation, having certification process, having the building a kind of a consumer connection. So consumer can recognize when I go to this product, I see this brand, I can scan to show this is the brand I like. I can check it. I can see potentially the way it's produced. So those information becoming much more part of the product attribute, where consumer can directly see much more on with also the 5G network. Those things indeed will become very important part of the product.
Hang on there. Are individual farmers creating their own brand with their own brand name?
Some are. So you see the trend. Maybe also talk about the one case, the organic farm product. It's for example, you will see that the branding or leading product for every government, it's a very important topic, because it's a big problem when you have the market really bipolarized. So you have either the high premium market where a lot of cost really goes into the marketing, putting into a very nice supermarket or the packaging basically, or you have a very low end market. There's no differentiation, no branding, and price is very low. So, and that's a big problem. So there's no middle ground. You need to actually more diverse, so different product, different varieties. If you are not the most premium, you can still trust that it's good. But right now in China, you have either you are in a high end or you're in a low end. So there's no middle ground, basically. And
that is where the opportunity is for more universal brands. So you could create, you have Farmer's brand high up, and you could create, Unilever is going to hate me for saying this, but like Unilever brands, not top end, but in the middle.
If you can give what consumer care, what they, the one thing is the health issue, whether it's the pesticide or whatever, but offering the attribute is fresh, looks good, but not the highest end price, but with the attribute, but not the lowest. Yes, there's a big market for it, but then it requires also a kind of an industry-wide effort, really that needs to be standard. So a standard people recognize. And so you see in the Chinese government policies, every local government, county government, they have a target to say each as the agricultural KPIs that my county, my village need to have one branded product, meaning a pear from Jiaxing. So that's, a kind of geographical identification. So there, the government tried to work with the cooperatives, working with the farmers to create a standard. So when consumer, they can buy pears, but not have or the very expensive one imported, whatever, or a bunch of no differentiation. But this pear is coming from, has its characteristic, has a origin, where it's from. There's endorsement from in the sector. So that trend is very important, meaning indeed you need to have bridge that gap basically to have good quality, trusted product, but not with all the high costs associated with it.
Yeah. Tiffany, being a strategic marketeer myself, I see lots of opportunities arising from this story. We need to stop here. I think we could talk for hours, and we need you back on the show. You will be back on the show on land policy, and I think you need to be back on the show to develop this market. What is this? There is this upscale market, there is this low price market, and something in the middle. And that something in the middle, obviously, is a huge market that needs to be developed, obviously, with the right marketing ideas. So we need to talk about that as well, perhaps even in a kind of closed webinar with entrepreneurs. Tiffany, thank you very much for this interview.
Yeah, thank you, Dick, for the discussion.